The reptilian aliens picked the wrong little girl to brutally murder. Now humanity will unleash its mutant bioweapon beasts to scorch the Wagner from their colonized world in retribution. Former military bioweapons expert Ralph Bailey, now a simple farmer on a remote colony planet, stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable alien cruelty. The savagely mutilated corpse of young Lily, an angelic girl he cared for, lay sprawled in her own blood. Claw marks scored her flesh. Scales clung to her wounds. The evidence all pointed to Pollux, sadistic leader of the occupying Wagner reptilian species. White-hot rage ignited in Ralph. He rushed to transmit a secret communique to Earth Military Command, detailing the unprovoked alien atrocity against an innocent human child. Upon receiving word, Earth's leaders recoiled in outrage and disgust. This heinous crime could not go unanswered. In an emergency session, Earth's High Command sanctioned the immediate development of Project Warmonger, genetically engineered mutant warbeasts designed for the sole purpose of hunting and annihilating Wagner. These nightmarish creations would be mankind's ultimate doomsday weapon, unleashed against the alien foe. Ralph received orders to return to Earth at once to lead Project Warmonger. Thoughts of sweet Lily's butchered body flooded his mind. He steeled himself, knowing he must harness his bioweapons expertise to avenge her murder. Arriving at a top-secret underground lab complex, Ralph was briefed by grim-faced generals. All ethical constraints were lifted. Ralph now had free rein to engineer the most lethal killing machines his twisted genius could envision. His monstrous warbeast children would be towering amalgams of animal, human, and machine. Armor-plated hides impervious to all weapons, bristling with surgically embedded gun turrets and blades. Metabolisms permanently set to kill mode. An unquenchable drive to mercilessly slaughter Wagner encoded into every DNA strand. To bring his abominations to full lethal potential, Ralph needs samples of Wagner biological matter to map their genome and pinpoint weaknesses to exploit. He prepares for the most dangerous mission of his life: infiltrate a heavily fortified Wagner base in a bid to steal the required alien tissues, knowing death awaits if he's captured. Before embarking on his deadly assignment, Ralph listens to final instructions from Earth Command. Once the warbeasts are deployed, his orders are to exterminate every last Wagner on the planet by any means necessary. No mercy, no prisoners. Scour the alien scum from the face of the galaxy and leave no trace of their existence. No price is too high to exact retribution for Lily's cruel slaying. The Wagner dared to spill human blood. Now they will reap humanity's unrestrained vengeance. Ralph crouched in the shadows, his eyes locked on the Wagner base's perimeter fence. 4 grueling days of surveillance finally paid off as he spotted a brief gap in the guard rotation. It was now or never. He sprinted for the fence, his footfalls muffled by the dense alien foliage. Undetected, Ralph slipped through the narrow opening and darted across the compound. Intel pointed to an outer building housing the xenobiology lab. Ralph picked the lock and slipped inside. The lab's interior stopped him cold. Glass tubes contained the mutilated remains of test subjects from a dozen species. Bile rose in Ralph's throat as he saw the unmistakable form of human cadavers among them. He forced down his revulsion and focused on the mission. Working fast, Ralph raided the lab's sample storage. Wagner tissue, blood vials, bone shards, all of it went into his portable cryo-containment unit. The pilfered alien biological matter would be crucial for Earth's warmonger program to engineer mutant warbeasts. Just as Ralph sealed the cryo unit, alarms shrieked to life, bathing the lab in crimson light. He cursed under his breath. They were onto him. The lab door burst open, and a squad of armed Wagner soldiers streamed in, hissing with rage. Ralph dropped the first 2 with well-placed shots from his plasma rifle. He rolled behind an examining table as the aliens returned fire. Reptilian claws raked the air inches from Ralph's face. He pumped shot after shot into the alien's armored hide until it collapsed in a smoldering heap. But not before its razor talon opened a deep gash in Ralph's thigh. Blood poured from the wound, soaking his fatigues. Ralph's vision swam, but he fought to stay conscious. he lobbed a plasma charge at the far wall. The explosion tore open an escape route. Ralph scooped up the cryo unit and limped out into the night. Angry shouts and pounding feet told him the Wagnir were in close pursuit. Searchlights stabbed down through the jungle canopy as alien ships joined the hunt from above. The dense foliage shielded Ralph from the probing lights, but it also slowed his escape. His torn thigh screamed in agony with each stumbling step, leaving a blood trail even a blind Wagnir could follow. Through the pain, Ralph's mind latched onto one overriding imperative: reach the hidden shuttle at the extraction point. He had to get the Wagnir biological materials back to Earth. It was humanity's only hope. Gritting his teeth, Ralph plunged a needle gun into his neck and depressed the trigger. An experimental adrenaline coagulant cocktail flooded his system. The drug sent Ralph's heart rate rocketing and slowed his blood loss to a sluggish ooze. It was toxic as hell, but might keep him on his feet just long enough. The stimulant hit like a hammer, sending Ralph crashing through the undergrowth in a disoriented lurch. He had to reach the extraction point before the drug wore off, or the Wagnir found him. The nose of a Wagnir ship dipped below the tree line dead ahead, fat spotlight beams sweeping the forest floor. Ralph skidded to a halt in a small clearing, the shuttle tantalizingly out of reach. A ring of Wagnir soldiers closed in around him, weapons trained on their cornered quarry. The alien ship settled into a hover above, its searchlight pinning Ralph like an insect. "Stand down, human," a voice rasped in heavily accented English. "Surrender the containment unit and your miserable life may be spared." It was Pollux, the Wagnir leader, glaring down with undisguised malice from the ship's forward view screen. Ralph's grip tightened on the cryo unit, his squeezing hard beneath the smears of human and alien blood. The reptilian butchers wanted their precious biological materials back. Not a chance in hell. They could pry it from his cold, dead fingers. This was for Lily and every other human the Wagnir had slaughtered, dissected, and defiled. Ralph welcomed death if it meant the Wagnir would burn. He raised his head in defiance to face his alien executioners, a mad grin splitting his sweat and gore-streaked face. Pollux snarled with rage, his eyes burning with ancient, inhuman hatred. The jungle fell tomb silent, human and Wagnir locked in a fatal face-off. Ralph's hand drifted to the plasma grenades clipped at his belt. The shuttle was less than 100 meters away. If he was going down, he'd take these scaly bastards with him. Ralph's finger hovered over the self-destruct button on the cryo unit. His eyes darted between the alien faces surrounding him, searching for any sign of movement. "One wrong move and I blow this thing sky high," Ralph snarled. "All your precious samples gone in an instant." Pollux's reptilian features contorted with rage. He hissed something in his native tongue to the soldiers, who lowered their weapons reluctantly. "You win this round, human," Pollux spat. "But mark my words, you will not leave this planet alive." Ralph inched backwards, keeping the cryo unit between himself and the Wagnir. Sweat trickled down his back as he navigated the treacherous jungle floor, never taking his eyes off the aliens. The extraction point came into view. Just a few more steps, and he'd be home free. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine cut through the air. Ralph dove to the ground as a blast of energy seared past, missing him by inches. The shuttle exploded in a fireball, showering the clearing with burning debris. Ralph scrambled to his feet, clutching the cryo unit to his chest. His only escape route was gone. With no other choice, Ralph plunged into the dense foliage. Branches whipped his face as he ran, the sounds of pursuit not far behind. He activated the emergency beacon on his wrist, praying Earth would respond in time. After what felt like hours of running, Ralph found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. He dragged himself inside, collapsing against the damp stone wall. His hands shook as he checked the cryo unit for damage. Outside, the jungle burned. Massive mechs stomped through the trees, their flamethrowers reducing everything to ash. Ralph knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He'd have to outsmart the Wagnir to survive. Using the meager supplies in his pack, Ralph cobbled together crude biological weapons: poisonous darts, contaminated water sources, even an airborne virus that would incapacitate but not kill. He refused to stoop to the Wagnir's level of cruelty. Days passed in a blur of guerrilla attacks and narrow escapes. Ralph's body was covered in cuts and burns, his uniform in tatters. The cryo unit's power indicator blinked a warning. Not much time left. He stumbled upon an ancient temple, its weathered stone covered in alien symbols. Perfect. Ralph limped inside, already formulating a plan. He'd make his final stand here, surrounded by the ghosts of a long-dead civilization. Using chemicals scavenged from the temple and his own expert knowledge, Ralph created a biobomb of terrifying power. He positioned himself deep in the catacombs, then activated a recorded distress call to lure in the Wagnir. It didn't take long for Pollux and his soldiers to arrive. Their scaled feet scraped against stone as they descended into the darkness. Ralph's finger tightened on the detonator. "For Lily," he whispered and pressed the button. A wave of sickly green mist exploded outward. The Wagnir's agonized screams echoed through the temple as the bioweapon ravaged their bodies. Ralph watched in horrified fascination as Pollux's flesh bubbled and sloughed off in sheets. Suddenly, human voices cut through the chaos. The rescue team had finally arrived. Ralph felt strong arms lift him up as the world faded to black. Gunfire and explosions. The acrid stench of ozone. Ralph drifted in and out of consciousness as the humans fought their way back to the extraction ship. His fingers remained locked around the cryo unit even as his life ebbed away. The last thing Ralph saw before the darkness took him was Lily's face. Her eyes shone with a mixture of sorrow and pride. He tried to speak, to promise her that her death would be avenged, but no sound came out. Then the starry void of space enveloped him, carrying him home to Earth and the horrors yet to come. The extraction ship's engines roared as it blasted away from the alien world. Ralph lay strapped to a medbay gurney, his body racked with pain. The cryo unit containing the precious Wagnir samples was clutched tightly to his chest. He refused to let go, even as medics worked frantically to stabilize his condition. Severe plasma burns on the left side, multiple lacerations, possible biocontamination, one doctor barked. Ralph's vision swam. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the worried face of the ship's captain peering down at him. Weeks passed in a haze of fevered nightmares. Ralph drifted in and out of awareness, plagued by visions of Lily's death and memories of the brutal fight on the alien world. Finally, his eyes fluttered open. The sterile white walls of a high-tech medical bay came into focus. "Welcome back to the land of the living, son." A gruff voice drew Ralph's attention. General Markovich stood at the foot of the bed, his craggy face set in its usual scowl. "The samples?" Ralph croaked, his throat dry and raw. "Safe and sound," Markovich nodded. "Thanks to you, we've got everything we need for Phase 1 of Project Warmonger. Our genetics team is already hard at work mapping the Wagnir genome." Ralph tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his body. "When can we start the next phase?" Markovich's scowl deepened. "Easy there, hotshot. You nearly died. Command's authorized a capture op to get us some live specimens, but you're in no shape." "I'm going," Ralph interrupted. "I have to." The general opened his mouth to argue, but something in Ralph's eyes made him pause. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, but you'll need to go through accelerated biotech region first. It won't be pleasant." Ralph gritted his teeth as needles pumped experimental nanites into his veins. His body felt like it was on fire as the microscopic machines worked to repair his damaged tissue. But thoughts of vengeance pushed him through the agony. Days later, Ralph stood in the ship's armory with Earth's most elite soldiers. He addressed the grim-faced men as they prepped their gear. "This is a capture mission. We need those Wagnir alive," he said. "But make no mistake, they won't extend us the same courtesy." A medic approached with a tray of auto-injectors. "Dead man virus," he explained. "If you're captured or killed, it'll liquefy your insides. Can't let the enemy study our biology." Ralph didn't hesitate. He jabbed the needle into his neck, feeling the burn as the nanotech entered his bloodstream. The assault on the asteroid base was brutal and efficient. Ralph's team blasted through the central reactor shielding, catching the Wagner completely off guard. They fought their way through twisting corridors, stunning and subduing alien officers. In the command center, Ralph came face to face with his nemesis. Pollux's reptilian eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with hate. The Wagner leader lashed out, his razor-sharp talons slicing through the air. Ralph ducked under the attack, driving his fist into Pollux's midsection. The alien wheezed, doubling over. But Pollux wasn't finished. With lightning speed, he whirled and impaled one of Ralph's men through the chest. The soldier's scream of agony fueled Ralph's rage. He launched himself at Pollux, raining down blows with cold precision. The Wagner's scaled hide split under the assault. Green blood splattered the floor as Ralph pummeled his enemy into submission. Pollux sagged in Ralph's grip, barely conscious. Ralph zip-tied the alien's hands and dragged him to the extraction point. Back on Earth, Ralph watched through reinforced glass as scientists began their grisly work. Pollux lay strapped to an operating table, his chest cavity splayed open. Despite the drugs and pain, the Wagner's eyes found Ralph's. They blazed with defiance and hatred. Ralph placed his hand against the glass. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. "You'll pay for what you've done. All of you." Ralph's boots echoed through the sterile corridors of the underground facility. The acrid stench of disinfectant barely masked the underlying reek of alien flesh and chemicals. He paused at a reinforced viewing window, staring at the grotesque form of Pollux. The Wagner leader's body bulged and pulsed, tubes and wires snaking from every orifice. Pollux's eyes rolled wildly, his mandibles working silently as viscous fluids pumped through transparent conduits. Ralph pressed a hand to the glass, a cold satisfaction warring with revulsion in his gut. "How's our star donor holding up?" Ralph asked the lead scientist, Dr. Curry. The woman's face was haggard, dark circles ringing her eyes. "Stable for now, but we're pushing his regenerative capabilities to the limit. I don't know how much longer." A bestial roar cut her off, the entire facility shuddering. Ralph sprinted down the hall, skidding to a stop at the main laboratory. Through the observation window, he watched in horror as one of the newly emerged Warbeasts tore into its own flesh, howling in mindless agony. "Shit," Ralph breathed. "What the hell happened?" Dr. Curry's voice crackled over the intercom. "Subject 37 manifested extreme psychological instability upon awakening. It's the third one this week." Ralph slammed a fist against the wall. Months of work, gallons of blood and sweat. All for this? He watched as a team in hazmat suits entered the chamber, struggling to subdue the thrashing monstrosity. Hours later, Ralph sat in General Markovich's office, head in his hands. The weight of their failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. "We have to face facts," Markovich said, his voice gruff. "The Warbeast program is a bust. These things are too unstable, too dangerous. We can't risk unleashing them." Ralph's head snapped up. "No, we can't give up now, not after everything we've sacrificed." Markovich's eyes softened. "I know you want payback for Lily. Hell, we all do. But these monsters, they're not the answer." Ralph stood pacing the small office. His mind raced, searching for a solution. What if we dial it back? Focus on enhancing human soldiers instead of creating entirely new creatures. The general leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." "We've learned so much about Wagner biology. If we could apply that knowledge to augment our own troops, make them stronger, faster, more resistant to Wagner weapons." Markovich nodded slowly. "It's risky, but not as apocalyptic as unleashing a horde of psychotic mutants. All right, Bailey, you've got 1 week to prove this new concept. After that, if we don't see results, I'm shutting it all down." Ralph left the office, his steps purposeful. He had work to do. As he passed the holding cells, Pollux's ravaged form caught his eye. The Wagner's gaze locked onto Ralph, filled with impotent hatred. "This isn't over," Ralph whispered. "One way or another, your kind will pay." He turned away, striding towards the labs. The answers were there, hidden in the alien DNA. Ralph would find them, regardless of the cost. For Lily. For Earth. For vengeance. Ralph stood in the dimly lit command center, his eyes fixed on the array of holographic displays before him. Each screen showed a different launch facility, spread across the allied colony worlds. He watched as technicians in hazmat suits moved with practiced efficiency, securing the last of the cryotubes containing the Warbeasts. The creatures inside thrashed violently, their misshapen forms barely visible through the frosted glass. Ralph's stomach churned at the sight, but he forced himself to keep watching. This was his creation, his responsibility. "All payloads secured, sir," a voice crackled over the comm. "Final checks complete." Ralph nodded, his throat dry. Proceed with activation of the command modules. On another screen, he saw the holding cells where the captured Wagner were being prepped. Pollux was in the center, his once proud form now a twisted mass of flesh and machinery. Tubes and wires snaked from his body, connecting him to the neural interface that would allow him to control the Warbeasts. As the final connections were made, Pollux's eyes snapped open. They locked onto the camera, filled with a hatred so intense it made Ralph take a step back. "You've doomed us all," Pollux's voice rasped through the speakers. "These abominations will destroy everything." Ralph leaned in close to the mic. "They'll destroy you first." He cut the feed, unable to look at Pollux's mutilated form any longer. The weight of what they were about to unleash pressed down on him, threatening to crush his purpose. General Markovich entered the room, his face grim. "It's done then?" Ralph nodded. "Yes, sir. The Warbeasts are in place. The command modules are online. We're ready." Markovich sighed heavily. "God help us all." For days, they waited. The tension in the command center was palpable, everyone jumping at the slightest sound. Then, it happened. A klaxon blared, red lights flashing. "Incoming transmission!" a technician shouted. The main screen flickered to life, showing a Wagner battle commander. His scaled face was twisted in a sneer. "Humans," he snarled, "your time has come. Surrender now, or watch as we turn your precious Earth to ash." Before anyone could respond, the screen split. Pollux's ravaged face appeared, his eyes wild with pain and rage. "Never!" he screamed. "You'll burn for what you've done to me." Markovich stepped forward. "You've made your choice," he said coldly. "Now face the consequences." With a nod from the general, Ralph input the launch codes. On the screens, they watched as the missile silos opened. Hundreds of warheads streaked into the sky, each carrying a payload of unimaginable horror. The retaliation was swift and brutal. The first impacts on Earth shook the command bunker. Reports flooded in of major cities reduced to smoking craters. But then, a faint signal, a coded burst from the fringes of Wagner space. Ralph leaned in, decoding the message with shaking hands. The words that appeared made his blood run cold. "They're loose. God help us. They're loose." A final transmission came through. Pollux's face filled the screen, no longer recognizable as Wagner or even sentient. His flesh bubbled and shifted, merging with the machinery around him. "You've killed us all," he gurgled, green blood frothing from his mouth. "The beasts, they cannot be controlled. The transmission cut off abruptly. Ralph stared at the blank screen, the magnitude of what they had done crashing down upon him. In the silence that followed, they could almost hear the distant screams of a galaxy burning. The command center erupted into chaos as Ralph's override protocols took effect. Screens flickered and died, leaving only the central holographic display active. "Bailey, what the hell are you doing?" Markovich roared, his face contorted with rage. Ralph's fingers flew across the neural interface, bypassing security measures he'd built himself. "Saving us all," he growled. The massive view screen showed a galaxy map dotted with expanding red zones of infection. Ralph zoomed in on Tanarus Prime, the epicenter of the Warbeast outbreak. Amid the carnage, a single blinking dot represented Pollux's mutated form. "You can't stop this," Markovich pleaded. "We've finally beaten them." Ralph spun to face the general, his eyes blazing. At what cost? Those things won't stop at the Wagner. They'll consume everything. He turned back to the console, inputting a series of complex commands. A warning klaxon blared as the facility's automated systems detected the breach. Security teams to the command center, Markovich bellowed into his comm unit. Ralph worked faster, sweat beading on his forehead. He had seconds before they stopped him. With a final keystroke, he established a direct neural link to Pollux's cybernetic implants. The world around Ralph faded as his consciousness plunged into a maelstrom of agony and madness. Pollux's tortured psyche screamed at him from every direction, a cacophony of pain and rage. Through the haze of suffering, Ralph glimpsed flashes of the carnage unfolding on Tanarus Prime. Warbeasts tore through Wagner flesh and metal alike, their bone-plated forms impervious to energy weapons. Pollux's mutated body writhed at the center of it all, a nightmare of tubes and wires fused with alien flesh. Ralph pushed through the psychic assault, focusing his will on the kill code buried deep within Pollux's neural architecture. He felt the Warbeast's feral hunger pulling at him, threatening to overwhelm his sense of self. In the physical world, Ralph's body convulsed as security teams burst into the command center. Markovich's voice seemed to come from far away. "Shut it down, now!" But Ralph was beyond their reach. His consciousness grappled with Pollux's, two minds locked in combat at the heart of an inferno. Through clenched teeth, Ralph began to recite the kill code, each syllable sending shockwaves of agony through his skull. On Tanarus Prime, the Warbeasts faltered mid-attack. Their hive-mind connection fluctuated as conflicting commands tore through their primitive brains. Pollux's monstrous form thrashed wildly, green ichor spraying from rupturing tubes. Ralph pushed harder, forcing the last fragments of the code through the neural link. He felt something give way, a dam bursting in his mind. Pollux's agonized scream echoed across light years as the kill code took hold. The Warbeasts on Tanarus Prime collapsed, their genetically engineered bodies literally tearing themselves apart from the inside. Ralph watched through Pollux's fading senses as the mutant horde self-destructed in a frenzy of cellular breakdown. As the last Warbeast fell, Ralph felt his connection to Pollux slipping away. The Wagner's final thoughts washed over him, a mixture of relief, despair, and something else. Gratitude? Ralph's eyes snapped open. He found himself on the floor of the command center, surrounded by armed guards. Markovich loomed over him, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. "It's done," Ralph croaked, his throat raw. "The Warbeasts are neutralized." Markovich's mind focused. "You've thrown away our only chance at—" A technician's voice cut him off. "Sir, we're receiving reports from all sectors. The mutant outbreaks are collapsing. It's over." Ralph struggled to his feet, legs shaky. He met Markovich's gaze, seeing the weight of consequence settling over the general. "Not over," Ralph said quietly. "This was just the beginning. We need to prepare for what comes next." He turned to the galaxy map, where the red zones of infection were already beginning to recede, but new threats loomed on the horizon, both alien and all too human. Ralph's boots crunched on the ash-coated ground as he led his strike team through the nightmarish landscape of Corvus. The air buzzed with an unholy energy, thick with spores and viral particles that swirled in sickly patterns visible even to the naked eye. "Filters at maximum," Ralph barked into his comm. "Any breach in your armor is certain death." The team pushed forward, their path blocked by pulsating walls of mutant flesh. Sergeant Voss fired his plasma cutter, searing through the biomass. The stench of burning tissue filled their helmets as they pressed on. "Sir, look," Private Chen pointed ahead. Rising from the twisted terrain, a massive spire of bone and metal pierced the sky. Its surface writhed with cancerous growths and sparking cybernetics. "Pollux's chamber," Ralph growled. "Let's finish this." They fought their way to the base of the structure, hacking through tendrils of mutated matter that lashed out at them. As they breached the entrance, a psychic scream tore through their minds. Ralph's teammates collapsed, clutching their heads in agony. Only Ralph remained standing, protected by the implant harvested from Pollux's own brain. He strode forward alone, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the abomination. The chamber pulsed with unholy life, and there, fused into the very walls, was what remained of Pollux. The once proud Wagner was now a mass of exposed nerves and biotech interfaces, barely recognizable as a living being. Pollux's remaining eye focused on Ralph, filled with hatred and pain. A barrage of psychic energy slammed into Ralph's mind, threatening to overwhelm him. "You've doomed us all," Pollux's voice rang in Ralph's head. "The mutation cannot be stopped." Ralph pushed back against the mental assault, his implant straining to its limits. Through the maelstrom of alien thoughts, he saw the truth. Pollux had become a nexus, a living conduit for the mutant plague spreading across the galaxy. "It ends here," Ralph snarled, unholstering his weapon. The hyper-compressed atomic slurry glowed an eerie blue in its containment chamber. Pollux's eye widened in fear and understanding. "Wait." Ralph pulled the trigger. The atomic slurry lanced out, tearing through Pollux's neural matrix layer by layer. The chamber shook as reality itself seemed to warp around them. A final, agonized scream echoed through Ralph's mind as Pollux's consciousness unraveled. Then, silence. For a moment, Ralph thought it was over, but a new sound filled the air. A cacophony of shrieks and roars from beyond the chamber walls. The mutant hordes were turning on themselves, tearing into their own flesh in a frenzy of self-destruction. Ralph staggered out of the crumbling spire, watching as the plague that had threatened to consume the galaxy collapsed in on itself. Warbeasts disintegrated into puddles of cancerous tissue. The very air seemed to clear as the viral miasma burned itself out. When it was over, Ralph stood alone in a sea of gray ash. The polluted sky began to clear, revealing unfamiliar constellations. In the distance, faint lights flickered, the first signs of human survivors emerging from their shelters. Ralph's calm crackled to life. "Bailey, you still with us?" He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He looked down at his hands, wondering what they had truly won, and at what cost. Ralph's boots sank into the soft earth as he stepped off the transport shuttle. The familiar weight of Earth's gravity pressed down on him, a stark contrast to the dead worlds he'd left behind. He inhaled deeply, savoring the clean air untainted by spores or viral particles. "Welcome home, Dr. Bailey," a stern-faced military officer greeted him. "General Markovich is expecting you in debriefing." Ralph nodded, his throat tight. As they walked through the sprawling military complex, he noticed the wary glances and hushed whispers that followed him. News of the Wagner's defeat had spread quickly, but so had the horrific details of how it was achieved. In the debriefing room, Markovich and a panel of high-ranking officials waited. Their faces were a mix of relief and unease. "The threat has been neutralized," Markovich began, his voice gravelly. "But at what cost?" Ralph's hands clenched involuntarily. "Sir, Save it, Bailey," Markovich cut him off. "We all bear responsibility for this. The Warmonger program achieved its primary objective, but we've opened a Pandora's box that can never be closed." A holographic display flickered to life, showing the devastated Wagner worlds. Vast swathes of land pulsed with sickly colors, indicating areas of persistent contamination. Even with the mutant matrices neutralized, these regions remain toxic nightmares, a scientist explained. The very building blocks of life have been rewritten. We're looking at permanently uninhabitable dead zones. Ralph's stomach churned as he watched footage of human outposts being sealed off. Decontamination crews in hazmat suits sprayed down every surface, while military blockades were established around the perimeters. "All surviving colonies are under strict quarantine," Markovich continued. "We can't risk even a single spore making its way back to Earth." As the briefing continued, Ralph's mind drifted. He saw flashes of the horrors he'd witnessed. Entire ecosystems consumed, colonial cities reduced to writhing masses of mutant flesh. The screams of the dying echoed in his ears. A heated argument erupted among the officials, snapping Ralph back to the present. "It was a necessary evil," one hardliner insisted. "We faced extinction. The Vognir left us no choice." "No choice?" Another shot back. "We've committed genocide on a galactic scale. There must be accountability." Ralph felt all eyes turned to him. He'd become a lightning rod for both praise and condemnation, the face of humanity's darkest triumph. Before he could speak, alarms blared throughout the facility. Markovich's comm unit crackled to life. "Sir, we've lost contact with Reclamation Team Alpha." The room erupted into chaos as live feeds from the dead worlds appeared. Ralph's blood ran cold as he watched monstrous shapes moving through the ruins, hideously warped creatures that defied description. "Impossible," he breathed. "The kill switch should have—" "It didn't get them all," Markovich growled. "And now they're evolving beyond our worst nightmares." The general's face hardened as he made a decision. He input a series of codes into his command console. "Initiating Purge Protocol," a computerized voice announced. Ralph's eyes widened in horror. "Purge Protocol? What are you—" A map of the quarantine zones appeared, showing waves of a new contagion spreading across the infected worlds. Ralph watched in stunned silence as the last vestiges of life, mutant and otherwise, were systematically erased. "It's over," Markovich said quietly. "Every trace of the Vognir and our own creations, gone." Ralph stared at the screens, his mind turning. They'd won, but at what cost? As the sterilizing agents did their work, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had crossed a line from which there was no return. Ralph's boots crunched on ash-covered ground as he stepped off the transport, the familiar weight of Earth's gravity pressing down on him. The air stung his nostrils, acrid with the scent of scorched earth and lingering chemical agents. He gazed out at the ruined landscape stretching to the horizon, crumbling buildings, shattered roads, and vast swathes of barren wasteland where thriving cities once stood. A stern-faced officer approached. "Dr. Bailey, General Markovich requests your presence for debriefing." Ralph nodded silently, his throat tight. As they walked through the military compound, hushed whispers and wary glances followed in his wake. News of the Vognir's defeat had spread quickly, but so had the horrific details of how it was achieved. In the command center, Markovich stood before a holo display showing the devastated Vognir worlds. Vast regions pulsed with sickly colors, indicating areas of persistent contamination. "Bailey," Markovich growled, not turning around. "We've achieved our objective, but at what cost?" Ralph's hands clenched involuntarily. Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A technician's panicked voice cut through the chaos. "Sir, we've lost contact with Reclamation Team Alpha." The room erupted as live feeds from the dead worlds appeared. Ralph's blood ran cold as he watched monstrous shapes moving through the ruins, hideously warped creatures that defied description. "Impossible," he breathed. "The kill switch should have—" "It didn't get them all," Markovich snarled, inputting a series of codes into his command console. "Initiating Purge Protocol," a computerized voice announced. Ralph watched in stunned silence as waves of a new contagion spread across the infected worlds, systematically erasing every trace of life, mutant and otherwise. As the sterilizing agents did their work, Markovich turned to Ralph. "You're to be honored with a full military ceremony. The people need a symbol of our triumph." Ralph's eyes narrowed. "No!" "That wasn't a request, Doctor." "I won't be your propaganda puppet," Ralph spat. "This isn't a victory to celebrate." Markovich's face hardened. He nodded to his security detail. "Escort Dr. Bailey to his quarters. Ensure he's ready for tomorrow's ceremony." As the guards closed in, Ralph's enhanced physiology kicked into overdrive. He moved with blinding speed, disarming the first two men before they could react. Alarms blared as he fought his way through the compound, bioweapon-augmented muscles allowing him to shrug off stun blasts and break through reinforced doors. Ralph burst out into the ravaged landscape, sirens wailing behind him. He sprinted towards the ruins of a nearby city, Markovich's furious voice echoing over the facility's loudspeakers. "Bailey is a traitor. Find him. Shoot to kill." As Ralph disappeared into the twisted remnants of civilization, he knew the real war was just beginning. Humanity had defeated the Wagner, but at the cost of its own soul. Now, he would have to save his species from itself.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.